You think that the incumbent companies in Detroit and Tokyo are too conservative and risk averse? They have too much invested in the status quo to really upend it, right? So it's going to require startups and disruptors to really bring bold change.
Well, I think part of it is that everybody thinks they know the solution. And with all due respect, we're proposing a large car that is light. It's the first light large car. We're also proposing a car that does not depend on exotic materials because we're all about cost. So it's structural architecture that makes the car light. It's a steel car.
But do you think large companies that already have billions invested in certain paradigms can really then change that paradigm, or it has to come from the outside, startups in California?
In the end, they do it. I mean, Toyota has been working on the Prius for a long time, and when the thing started to sell 1 million copies, they were surprised themselves. I mean, you look at Volkswagen. Volkswagen has a now 9-year-old program trying to break the mold on how to build an efficient car called the 1-liter car. They have a wonderful car called the 1X, perhaps the nicest eco car, but it's still too small and it's still based on carbon fiber. You break those two things, you start to have the answer. When we have a car that's an EPA highway cycle 129 miles per gallon gasoline burning car, that when you get to those numbers, you're out of trouble. You know, when we can do with a 10 kilowatt hour battery pack what others can't do with a 18, 20 kilowatt hour battery pack, your cost problem goes away, your warranty problem shrinks. A lot of these other issues start to go away. If you have a good car battery that's combined with that, yeah, but could you imagine having one of those batteries go into 3 cars? Suddenly your cost numbers become a lot more favorable. Suddenly your warranty liability becomes less. That's where we have to go. And in the end, the United States needs to do this with elegant engineering. We don't need to keep value engineering what we already know. We need to do better.
So you think this is just an engineering question?
This is the beginning of it. Yes, it's an engineering question.
Bill Reinert?
I don't know that it's not an incremental game. I watch what happened with Ford once they've got Mihaly in place and the lightweighting going on there, and I watch our competitors. I mean, we keenly watch the lightweighting and how we're doing structured hydroforming of steels and laser welding and all that stuff. And you start to get, you start to really shave serious pounds out of just the frame for the door. You can save 50 pounds just out of doing hydroforming and laser welding. So it's not that we necessarily have to reinvent ourselves. I think over time we will do that. We just as a matter of being competitive.
Well, and with due respect to Oliver's observations, I think what's technically true in a lab test or for one purpose vehicle that's intending to achieve, let's say, a mile per gallon objective, we're providing vehicles that customers do use for multiple purposes and expect to last over 100,000 miles. And so the duty cycles of the vehicles come into play, the specific applications that the vehicles are being used for come into play. The expectations the customer has. Don't forget, the customer is going to decide what works here. The customer is going to ultimately decide, who the winners are, and that's why I worry sometimes when people look at a particular electric vehicle solution as the silver bullet. I don't think we know that yet, and I think that's why the experimentation among the companies is a good thing. Customers will tell us who wins.
And let's get a baseline here. How many electric cars are actually on the road today?
Yeah.
Well, GM is one of the ones.
We've sold at this point, and we're going to sell about 10,000 this year.
Volts.
Volts.
Volts. Yeah.
Volts. We've sold 2,000 plus at this point.
And I understand most of those are Prius buyers coming over.
90%.
Okay.
Sorry, Bill.
Yeah,
so
when it breaks down, we'll get them back.
No, don't play like you can't play like that.
Okay, I know.
Actually, it's interesting because they are mostly Prius buys.
Yeah.
So is that going to erode, back to my earlier question, is that going to kind of, is Toyota going to try to keep all its chips on the hybrid, or going to move more aggressively toward electric?
Well, we're doing
watch those Volt sales closely.
We're doing a plug-in Prius. We're taking a little different job. We're putting 150 of them out in the community. We want to understand how the charging behavior and the customer merge together and what this is like. So we've got them instrumented, and I think we collect 300 channels of data every second, and that's going to be available for all the national labs and their resources board. I think we're working with you to get that done. So we want to understand how this works. So we've got the plug-in Prius coming out in 2012. My project is the IQ EV, which is the non-owned ownership model that we're going to bring here to California, working with some other people and
Are you going to lease the car to lease?
I can't get in, we haven't, there will not be a financial transaction that's like a lease or a sell. It won't be that way.
They're going to be free.
They're going,
That's great.
you're going to pay,
We all get,
I'll take one.
you're going to pay a provider for service, all in service, everything.
okay, again, so moving toward a service model.
Yeah,
rather
so
than-
so you might
selling
dri-
miles rather than
you
selling
might drive
miles.
my IQ one day and you might say I need an SUV to go up to Sacramento, and you can go to the dealer and do something like that. So we're looking at that.
This is important.
Yes, Sperling?
This is important what Bill's saying, and it's kind of what I was referring to earlier about the market evolving. You know, at UC Davis, we've done a lot of this market research, including with the plug-in Priuses, and you know, it's clear that the market's going to be evolving. But we don't really, we think, you know, actually some of our research suggests that, you know, the strategy that Toyota is using is probably a very promising one, where you have a plug-in Prius with a relatively small battery, because you get a lot of the benefit with a small battery and less cost. But there's questions, you know, there's probably a big market for those that want the 40-mile range also. But we don't really know, and so we're doing lots of market research. There's the model that Bill's also talking about, you know, the shared use of vehicles. The world is going to change. The world is going to change because, you know, both from the market and the policy perspective, we're going to be tightening up very aggressively the greenhouse gas standards and the energy use in the vehicles. And that's going to cause, that by itself will cause a major, you know, that might be Oliver, you know, the solution
In an
for Oliver.
entirely rational universe.
Mike Robinson?
In an entirely rational universe, what Bill and Dan are talking about makes perfect sense, because when you think about how little time you spend in a vehicle and how much of an investment it represents, there's probably a more efficient way to get around.
There's actually a very interesting startup based here in San Francisco. It's called Sprite or something like that. Sunil Paul actually is trying to, it's developing a way to take the city car share model so that those of us who own cars and it sits in the garage 80 or 90% of the time, we can then lease that out to our neighbors if we dare and think they're not going to spill coffee on our chairs. And make money off of that, right?
The but in what I just said is the people, not everybody, but a lot of what we know is that people have, it's not necessarily rational, but they have an emotional connection to wanting to own their vehicle and take personal responsibility and pride in that vehicle. One of the things we're learning from the Volt, by the way, and we get the constant feedback. We've got the OnStar system connected. We know where the vehicles are. We know how long they've driven per day, how many miles have been put on them. We also know from the verbatims we get from the customers that the fun to drive aspects of this thing and the personal pride of ownership is a big deal. And so don't lose sight of that.